The mist hangs low over the fjord as dawn breaks. Silhouettes of longships emerge from the fog, their dragonheads piercing through the veil between worlds. Silent, coordinated, methodical, dozens of vessels glide in perfect formation despite having no modern means of communication. This was the Viking way, a masterclass in coordination that would baffle even modern military strategists. For centuries, historians have pondered how these seafarers from the north managed to orchestrate complex raids across vast distances without modern technology, written orders, or the communication infrastructure we take for granted today. Before we begin this journey into the Viking Age, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? It's always fascinating to see our community of history lovers spread across the world. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. Every subscription helps us keep exploring the real stories behind the legends. Now let's begin. The world before the Viking expansion was one of isolated communities where news traveled slowly and kingdoms existed in relative isolation. Europe was emerging from the shadow of Rome's collapse, with Christianity spreading gradually northward. The continent was a patchwork of nascent kingdoms, monasteries storing knowledge, and rural communities living much as their ancestors had for generations. Communication between regions was limited, often restricted to traveling merchants, pilgrims, or official emissaries. Messages might take months to travel from one end of a kingdom to another. The sophisticated naval coordination that would arrive with the Norse raiders seemed almost supernatural by comparison. In the harsh landscapes of Scandinavia, a different world had taken shape. The Norse peoples had adapted to a life governed by the rhythm of the seasons, where survival depended on community cooperation and shared knowledge. Their settlements dotted the fjords and valleys, seemingly disconnected yet bound by invisible threads of kinship, trade, and belief. These connections would become the foundation of their communication networks, enabling them to coordinate efforts across vast distances. The very geography of Scandinavia, with its intricate coastlines and numerous waterways, had shaped a society where waterborne communication was not just preferred but essential for survival and prosperity. The Norse understanding of their world was deeply rooted in practical knowledge passed down through generations. They studied the stars and developed exceptional navigational skills, reading the sun's position with specially designed sundials and sunstones that could locate the sun even on cloudy days. Archaeological findings near Greenland have uncovered what experts believe to be calcite crystals used as sunstones, confirming accounts in the sagas. These crystals could polarize light, allowing navigators to determine the sun's position even when it was obscured by clouds or during the twilight hours of northern summers. Their intimate understanding of weather patterns allowed them to predict storms and favorable sailing conditions with remarkable accuracy. This knowledge wasn't merely academic. It formed the backbone of their communication systems and allowed for precise planning. The Norse concept of time differed significantly from our modern understanding. They divided the year into two main seasons, summer and winter, with crucial transition periods marked by specific celestial events. These predictable astronomical occurrences served as natural timepieces, allowing raiders from different regions to coordinate departures and arrivals without direct contact. The summer solstice, when the sun barely set in northern latitudes, marked prime raiding season, while the winter solstice signaled the time for planning the next year's expeditions. These natural calendars were remarkably consistent, allowing for coordination across vast geographical areas without written schedules or messengers. At the heart of Viking expansion was the longship, perhaps the most sophisticated naval technology of its age. These vessels weren't just means of transportation, they were communication tools themselves. The sight of a longship on the horizon conveyed immediate messages to friends and foes alike. The design of the sail, the figurehead, and even the shield arrangement along the gunwales all conveyed information about the ship's origin, purpose, and allegiance. Archaeologists studying the Gokstad and Oseberg ships have noted that their construction allowed for both speed and stability, critical factors in maintaining formation during group sailing. The shallow draft enabled these ships to navigate inland waterways, creating communication corridors that penetrated deep into territories that would otherwise be inaccessible. But how did Vikings coordinate multiple ships across vast stretches of open water? Archaeological evidence suggests they used a sophisticated system of signal fires along coastlines strategically positioned on high points visible from the sea. These beacons could transmit prearranged messages visible for miles, warnings of danger, signals to gather, or indications of safe harbors. The Norse sagas mention these fires as critical elements in their naval operations. Recent archaeological surveys along the Norwegian coastline have identified patterns of elevated sites with evidence of large fires, positioned with clear sight lines to adjacent signal points, creating a chain of communication that could rapidly transmit messages along hundreds of miles of coastline. This system was remarkably similar to the Anglo-Saxon beacon network established centuries later as a defense against Viking raids, an ironic adoption of their adversaries' methods. The Viking longship itself facilitated communication while at sea. The open deck design allowed for clear visibility between crew members, while the elevated positions at bow and stern served as command points. Experimental archaeology involving reconstructed longships has demonstrated that voice commands could carry surprisingly well across the water, especially in the calm conditions Vikings preferred for sailing. For longer distances, ships would maintain visual contact, with designated lookouts watching for flag or shield signals from the lead vessel. This visual signaling system, though simple, was remarkably effective for maintaining formation and coordinating tactical movements. The call to expansion didn't happen spontaneously or without planning. What appears in historical records as sudden raids was often the culmination of months or even years of information gathering. Viking traders would visit foreign shores, carefully noting defenses, wealth, and vulnerabilities. They would return with valuable intelligence that informed future expeditions. These trader scouts were the reconnaissance units of the Viking world, gathering information while appearing as peaceful merchants. The dual identity of Viking traders and raiders created an effective intelligence network that spanned much of Europe. Archaeological evidence from trading centers like Hedeby shows they functioned as information exchanges where news, maps, and intelligence could be shared among Norse travelers. When multiple jarls or chieftains agreed to join forces for a major expedition, they employed sophisticated planning methods. Archaeological findings at Viking assembly sites called things show evidence of large gatherings where leaders would coordinate future actions. These meetings would establish timetables based on lunar cycles and seasonal patterns, ensuring all participating ships could rendezvous at predetermined locations despite traveling separately. The thing sites were carefully chosen for their acoustic properties, with natural amphitheaters allowing speakers to address large gatherings without modern amplification. Stone settings at these sites suggest they may have been used to create rudimentary maps, allowing leaders to plan routes and rendezvous points with remarkable precision. The meeting of worlds between Vikings and their targets was often characterized by the element of surprise, not because the Norse appeared randomly, but because their coordination was so precise that defenders had little warning. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records how Viking fleets would appear simultaneously at multiple locations along a coastline, suggesting a level of planning and communication that seemed supernatural to their victims. The famous raid on Lindisfarne in 793 CE, which announced the Viking Age to a horrified Europe, was not an isolated incident, but part of a carefully coordinated series of raids that struck multiple coastal targets within days of each other. What modern historians now understand is that these were carefully orchestrated operations, timed to lunar cycles, and utilizing shared navigational knowledge that allowed separate fleets to arrive with remarkable synchronicity. Aboard the ships themselves, Communication had to be clear despite the roar of waves and howling winds. The archaeological record shows evidence of musical instruments, including horns and drums that would have carried over long distances. Different rhythms and signals would convey specific commands: advance, retreat, form line, or prepare for landing. The ship's commander, standing at the stern near the rudder, would use visual signals with his arms or a bright-colored cloth that could be seen by nearby vessels. Reconstructed Viking horns, based on archaeological findings, have demonstrated their remarkable carrying power across water. Tests have shown those signals could be heard up to 2 miles away in favorable conditions, allowing for coordinated maneuvers among multiple ships. The cultural shock experienced by monasteries and settlements facing Viking raids wasn't just from the violence, but from the bewildering precision of their attacks. How could people from so far away arrive with such detailed knowledge of local geography and defenses? The answer lies in the Norse oral tradition. Vikings memorized detailed sailing directions, landmarks, and coastal features. These mental maps were so precise that modern researchers have successfully used saga descriptions to navigate complex coastal waterways. The Havamal, a collection of Norse wisdom poetry, emphasizes the importance of memory and observation, skills that were essential for their navigation and communication systems. Unlike their Christian contemporaries, who increasingly relied on written records, the Norse maintained a strong oral tradition that allowed for the transmission of detailed geographical knowledge without maps or charts. In the aftermath of initial contacts, the Vikings established more permanent communication networks. They created trading posts and seasonal camps that served as information hubs, where news and intelligence could be gathered and disseminated. Archaeological evidence from these sites shows they were strategically positioned at river mouths and natural harbors, creating a network of information points spanning from Newfoundland to the Caspian Sea. The famous eastern route, known as the Way of the Varangians to the Greeks, connected Scandinavia to Constantinople through a series of river systems and portages. Along this route, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of way stations that served not just as rest points, but as communication hubs where travelers could exchange information and messages. The chronicles and memory of Viking communication systems appear in their own literature. The Icelandic sagas describe how messages were carried by designated runners or message sticks, carved wooden objects that contained both written runes and symbolic meanings. These message sticks served as credentials for the messenger and could contain coded information understood only by the intended recipient. This sophisticated system ensured that sensitive information could travel securely across vast distances. Examples of these message sticks have been found in archaeological contexts, confirming the saga accounts. They typically contained short runic inscriptions alongside symbolic carvings, creating a dual-level message that combined written and visual communication. One remarkable aspect of Viking communication was their use of ravens as navigational aids. Several historical sources, including the saga of Eric the Red, mention ravens being released from ships to find the direction of land. If a raven flew up and then returned to the ship, no land was near. If it flew in a specific direction, the navigators would follow, knowing land lay that way. This practice is corroborated by the association of ravens with Odin, the god of wisdom, whose own ravens Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, would fly across the world, gathering information. This practical use of animal behavior demonstrates the Vikings' deep integration with the natural world and their ingenious solutions to communication challenges. Modern experiments with ravens have confirmed their remarkable ability to seek land, suggesting this method would have been reliably effective. As their territory expanded, the Norse established a network that historians now recognize as one of history's earliest postal routes. During the 10th century, designated messengers would travel between Viking settlements carrying news, diplomatic communications, and trading information. The speed of this system was remarkable for its time. Messages could travel from Dublin to Kiev in a matter of weeks, an unprecedented pace in early medieval Europe. Archaeological evidence for this network comes in the form of identical seal designs and similar runic inscriptions found across vastly separated Viking settlements, suggesting regular communication and cultural continuity despite enormous distances. The language of the Vikings itself facilitated their coordination. Old Norse was relatively uniform across Scandinavia during the Viking Age, meaning a warrior from modern-day Norway could easily understand one from Denmark or Sweden. This linguistic unity was a tremendous advantage in coordination, allowing diverse groups to come together for raids and expeditions without communication barriers that plagued many other medieval alliances. By contrast, their victims often spoke various dialects or entirely different languages, Frankish, Saxon, Celtic, Slavic, making coordinated defense difficult. This linguistic advantage extended to their ability to adapt and learn new languages. Runic inscriptions found throughout their territories show Vikings quickly incorporated local terms and phrases, facilitating trade and information gathering. Perhaps most fascinating was the Vikings' use of coded communication. Runic inscriptions found throughout the Viking world sometimes contained hidden messages that could only be decoded with specific knowledge. Some used simple substitution ciphers, while others employed more complex systems where alternate readings of the text revealed secret information. The famous Rock stone in Sweden contains what appears to be an encrypted message that continues to challenge modern scholars. These encoded messages allowed Viking leaders to communicate strategic information even if the message was intercepted. Certain runic inscriptions used cryptographic techniques like shifting letter values or writing backwards, creating messages that appeared decorative to outsiders but contained clear meaning to those with the key. The symbolic language of the Vikings extended beyond writing. Their artwork, particularly on memorial stones, often contained visual information about alliances, victories, and territorial claims. These public monuments served as propaganda tools and information sources, maintaining group cohesion and shared knowledge across generations and distances. The famous Jelling stone in Denmark, raised by Harald Bluetooth, announces both his conquest of Denmark and Norway and his conversion to Christianity, a public broadcast of political and religious realignment. The imagery on the stone combines pagan and Christian elements, communicating a complex political and religious message that could be understood by both literate and non-literate audiences. Expansion of the Viking legacy relied on their ability to maintain communication links with the homeland while establishing new settlements. Archaeological evidence from Viking colonies shows they maintained consistent cultural practices and political connections with Scandinavia. This wasn't merely nostalgia, it represented ongoing communication channels that facilitated trade, reinforcement, and cultural exchange. The Norse colony at Dublin remained in regular contact with the Viking homeland for centuries, serving as a critical node in their communication network. Settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and possibly North America maintained these connections despite enormous distances, creating what might be considered the first transoceanic communication network in the Atlantic world. Weather forecasting was another crucial element of Viking communication systems. The sagas describe designated weather watchers who would observe cloud patterns, animal behavior, and natural phenomena to predict conditions days in advance. This information would be rapidly distributed to ships preparing for voyages or raids, allowing them to coordinate departures across different fjords to rendezvous precisely at predetermined locations despite having no direct contact. Recent analysis of Viking sailing routes suggests they had sophisticated understanding of seasonal weather patterns, enabling them to utilize favorable winds and currents with remarkable precision. They knew, for instance, that spring voyages from Norway to England could utilize prevailing easterly winds, while return journeys in autumn could take advantage of westerlies. Knowledge that allowed for predictable travel times and coordination of multiple vessels. The end of the Viking era didn't come suddenly. As Norse raiders gradually transformed into settlers, traders, and eventually Christians, their communication systems evolved rather than disappeared. Many of their routes became established trade corridors that would serve European commerce for centuries. Their assembly sites became towns and administrative centers. Even their signal beacon system was adopted by medieval kingdoms for coastal defense. The communication networks they established formed the foundation for later medieval trade routes and diplomatic channels. The Hanseatic League, which dominated northern European trade in the later Middle Ages, operated along many of the same waterways and harbors first utilized by Viking traders and raiders. Lessons from the North continue to influence our understanding of pre-modern communication. The Vikings demonstrated that sophisticated coordination didn't require written bureaucracy or permanent infrastructure. Their system relied instead on shared cultural knowledge, environmental awareness, and precise temporal understanding. They proved that human memory, properly trained, could store vast amounts of geographical and navigational information, a reminder that communication technology takes many forms beyond the written word. Modern studies of memory techniques have shown that the methods described in Norse literature for memorizing geographical information are remarkably effective, allowing individuals to retain detailed mental maps without written aids. Archaeological discoveries continue to expand our understanding of Viking communication methods. Recent excavations have uncovered what appear to be portable sundials, small wooden discs with precisely positioned holes that, when aligned properly, could help determine latitude and time of day. These tools would have been essential for coordinating meeting points and rendezvous times for ships traveling separately toward a common destination. Experimental reconstructions have demonstrated their remarkable accuracy, capable of determining local noon within minutes, providing a standardized timepiece in an age before mechanical clocks. The legacy of Viking communication reveals itself in unexpected places. The parliamentary traditions of Iceland and the Isle of Man, among the world's oldest continuing democratic institutions, evolved directly from Viking assembly practices where information was shared and decisions made collectively. These things were sophisticated forums where news from across the Norse world would be exchanged, alliances formed, and expeditions planned. The Althing of Iceland, established in 930 CE, created a remarkable system where legal decisions and news were memorized by a designated law speaker, who would recite one-third of all laws each year at the assembly, ensuring the entire legal code was spoken aloud every 3 years, a sophisticated oral information system that required no written records. In many ways, the Vikings created an early information network that spanned continents. From North America to the Middle East, Norse traders, raiders, and explorers established connections that transcended the limited world of early medieval Europe. They carried not just goods, but knowledge. New technologies, cultural practices, and strategic information flowed along these routes, enriching societies far from Scandinavia. Archaeological evidence from Viking sites shows they acquired and transported knowledge as well as goods. Islamic astronomical instruments have been found in Scandinavian contexts, while Norse navigational techniques appear to have influenced maritime practices as far away as the Mediterranean. The winter months, when ice prevented sailing, became crucial planning periods. Archaeological evidence from longhouses shows they served as planning centers where maps could be drawn in the dirt floors, strategies discussed, and spring campaigns coordinated. The Norse concept of veternatum, or winter nights, marked the beginning of this planning season, a time when warriors returned home and began preparing for the next year's voyages. The longhouse design itself facilitated communication, with its central hearth providing both warmth and light for evening gatherings where sagas were recited, information exchanged, and plans formulated for the coming season. Recent archaeological investigations using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that many longhouses were acoustically engineered with dimensions and features that enhanced sound carrying, perfect for information sharing in group settings. Perhaps most remarkably, the Vikings maintained this communication network without a centralized authority or formal institution managing it. Unlike the Roman cursus publicus or later medieval royal messenger systems, Viking communication relied on cultural practices, shared knowledge, and mutual benefit. It was organic and adaptable, allowing it to survive political upheavals and operate across cultural boundaries. This decentralized structure proved remarkably resilient. Even as political power shifted among different Viking leaders and regions, the underlying communication networks continued to function effectively, binding together the disparate elements of the Norse world. This networked approach to communication extended to their religious practices as well. Sacred sites across Scandinavia served as information exchange points during religious festivals, when people from widespread communities would gather to honor the gods and exchange news. Archaeological evidence from these cult sites shows they were often positioned at natural communication hubs where land and water routes intersected, maximizing their effectiveness as information exchange points. The shared religious calendar ensured that these gatherings occurred at predictable times, creating regular opportunities for news and information to spread throughout the Norse world. As the northern lights shimmer above the fjords today, we can imagine the ancient Norse looking to these same skies for guidance. Their ships have long since returned to the earth, their signal fires extinguished, but the echoes of their communication methods remain. In their ability to coordinate complex operations across vast distances, the Vikings weren't just fearsome warriors or bold explorers. They were masters of information, turning knowledge into power long before the information age. Their legacy reminds us that communication transcends technology. At its heart, it remains what it was for the Vikings, a human endeavor built on shared understanding, precise observation, and the eternal desire to bridge the distances between us.